Sarah Miller sat in the back pew of her church for what she knew would be the last time. At 28, she'd been a Sunday school teacher, youth group leader, and the kind of volunteer every pastor dreams of having. But that morning in March 2024, as she watched yet another all-male panel discuss women's roles in the church, something inside her finally broke. She wasn't alone. Three other women in their 20s sat near her, and they exchanged knowing glances. None of them would be back next week. Sarah is part of a silent exodus that's reshaping American Christianity. In 2024, for the first time in recorded history, 39% of Gen Z women now identify as religiously unaffiliated, compared to 31% of Gen Z men. This stunning reversal has church leaders scrambling for answers, but the women leaving aren't making announcements. They're not posting dramatic Facebook goodbyes, they're simply disappearing. The numbers tell a story that would have been unthinkable just a generation ago. In 1991, a majority of American women attended church weekly. By 2019, that number had plummeted to just 3 in 10. Think about that for a moment. In less than 30 years, church attendance among women dropped by 20 percentage points. That's millions of empty seats that were once filled by the very people who kept churches running, organizing potlucks, teaching children, visiting the sick, and yes, putting money in the collection plate week after week. But here's where it gets truly unprecedented. Since 2022, for the first time in American history, men have been outpacing women in church attendance. In 2024, 30% of men were attending weekly, compared to just 27% of women. For those who understand church history, this is like discovering that water now flows uphill. Women have been the backbone of Christianity for 2,000 years now. They're walking away. Welcome back to Professor Archive, where we uncover the hidden stories that shape our world. Before we dive deeper into this exodus, I'm curious. Where are you watching from today, and what time is it there? Are you someone who grew up in church, or are you observing this from the outside? Drop a comment below, and if you find value in these deep dives into cultural shifts, consider hitting that super thanks button. It really helps us continue bringing you these investigations. The roots of this exodus stretch back further than you might think. Picture a Sunday morning in 1985. Churches across America are packed. Women outnumber men in the pews by significant margins, with 36% of women attending weekly compared to just 26% of men. Fast forward to today, and that 10-point gender gap has not only closed, it's reversed. What happened in those intervening decades? Rachel Thompson was 13 years old in 1997 when her youth pastor gave a talk about purity that would shape the next 2 decades of her life. "Your body is like a piece of tape," he said, sticking a piece of duct tape to one boy's arm, then another, then another. By the time he tried to stick it to the fourth volunteer, it barely adhered. This is what happens when you give yourself away before marriage. The room full of teenagers sat in silence. Rachel looked down at her hands, already feeling dirty for thoughts she hadn't even had yet. This was the height of the purity culture movement, and millions of young women across America were receiving similar messages. They were told their worth was tied to their virginity, that their primary purpose was to remain pure for their future husbands, and that their bodies were dangerous temptations that needed to be covered and controlled. The overemphasis on sexual purity left many women so focused on their physical lives that their spiritual lives were neglected. For years, messages around worth and holiness were tied almost exclusively to modesty and abstinence, rather than discipleship and spiritual formation. But purity culture was just one piece of a larger puzzle. As the 1990s rolled into the 2000s, women were achieving unprecedented educational success. Today, nearly 60% of bachelor's degrees are awarded to women. They were entering careers their grandmothers could only dream of. They were delaying marriage, sometimes indefinitely. And increasingly, they were finding that the churches they grew up in had no idea what to do with them. If you're not married and you don't have kids, and you're no longer one of the students, then where do you go? You end up going nowhere, explained Stacy, a 38-year-old woman who started a nonprofit organization to help children. When researchers first met her 3 years ago, she was frustrated with the church, but committed to sticking it out. Today, she no longer attends. The message was clear, even when unspoken. Single professional women didn't quite fit the mold. Single women were often described as intense or difficult if they were ambitious or career-focused. The ideal Christian woman was supposed to be gentle, easygoing, and submissive. Then came 2012, a year that would mark a turning point. That was the year that the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops launched its religious liberty drive against covering contraceptives in the Affordable Care Act. Suddenly, women's healthcare became a battleground, with religious institutions fighting for the right to deny contraceptive coverage to their female employees. For many young women watching this unfold, it felt like their churches cared more about controlling their bodies than caring for their souls. The tipping point arrived in different ways for different women. For Maria Rodriguez, it came in 2018 when the Pennsylvania grand jury report revealed that over 300 Catholic priests had abused more than 1,000 children over 70 years. Through research and interviews, investigators uncovered systematic cover-ups, with accused priests being put on temporary sick leave and then transferred to another parish where they could have a fresh start. Maria had volunteered at her parish for 15 years. The next Sunday, she couldn't bring herself to walk through those doors. For Ashley Chen, it was the 2019 Southern Baptist Convention report. Newspapers reported that hundreds of Southern Baptist clergy and staff had been accused of sexual misconduct over the past 20 years, including dozens who returned to church duties while leaving more than 700 victims with little in the way of justice or apologies. Ashley had been considering seminary. She changed her major to social work instead. But perhaps nothing accelerated the exodus quite like what happened between 2016 and 2020. College-educated women's church attendance dropped below men's for the first time in 2016, the year that evangelicals cozied up to Donald Trump. The sight of religious leaders embracing a man who boasted about grabbing women, who had multiple affairs and allegations of sexual assault, it was too much cognitive dissonance for many women to bear. Jennifer Williams, a 34-year-old marketing executive, describes her breaking point. I sat there listening to my pastor defend things that, if my brother or father had done them, the church would have called sinful. But because it was political, suddenly it was okay. I realized the standards only applied to women. Men could do whatever they wanted if they had enough power. The pandemic became an unexpected off-ramp for millions of women. When churches went virtual in 2020, it gave women permission to step back without the social awkwardness of explaining why. Women's weekly church attendance dropped to just 25% during the pandemic, down from over 50% just a decade earlier. Many discovered something surprising. They didn't miss it. I thought I'd feel guilty, says Emma Peterson, a 29-year-old teacher. But instead, I felt free. Free from the constant messages that I wasn't enough. Not pure enough, not submissive enough, not married enough. For the first time in my life, my Sunday mornings were actually peaceful. The generational divide is stark. 61% of Gen Z women identify as feminist, far greater than women from previous generations. Nearly 2/3 of young women said they do not believe that churches treat men and women equally. These aren't angry activists trying to tear down institutions. These are young women who grew up in Sunday school, went on mission trips, and genuinely wanted to serve. They're leaving not because they hate the church, but because the church seems to have no place for who they've become. 54% of young women believe abortion should be available without any restriction. Nearly 3 in 10 women under the age of 30 now identify as something other than straight. Even those who are straight likely have close friends who aren't. A new PRRI poll found that 60% of young people who left their childhood religion said that negative treatment of gay and lesbian people was an important reason. The church's response to these changes has been, in many cases, to double down. Many congregations have focused on attracting and retaining men, with conferences on biblical manhood and sermons that emphasize male leadership. Researcher Ryan Burge noted that preaching specifically geared toward keeping men in the church may partly explain why women are leaving. But here's what makes this exodus particularly significant. Women aren't just attendees, they're the engines that keep churches running. Studies show that women tend to contribute much more time and energy to community building and volunteer efforts in places of worship. Without this dedicated source of volunteer labor, many congregations will be unable to serve their membership and their communities. The financial implications are staggering. Women have historically been reliable givers, often managing household charitable giving, even when they weren't the primary earners. Churches that have lost a third of their female members aren't just seeing empty pews, they're seeing empty offering plates. But perhaps the most profound impact will be generational. Research finds that mothers play an instrumental role in passing on religious values and beliefs to their children. Americans who were raised in religious households credit their mothers more so than their fathers for leading in their religious upbringing. When mothers leave church, they typically take their children with them. The pipeline of future church members is quietly drying up. Some women are finding alternative spiritual communities. Sarah Miller, whom we met at the beginning, now attends a weekly meditation group. "I still believe in something greater than myself," she says. "I just don't believe it requires me to shrink myself to fit into someone else's idea of what a woman should be." Others are creating their own spiritual practices. Book clubs that discuss theology without the patriarchy. Online communities where questions are welcomed rather than silenced. Volunteer groups that do the work of caring for others without the framework of organized religion. The tragedy, according to Dr. Diana Butler Bass, a historian of Christianity, is that this exodus was preventable. Churches had countless opportunities to listen to women, to value their contributions beyond childcare and potlucks, to take their concerns seriously. Instead, many doubled down on male authority just as women were finding their voices in every other area of society. Not all churches are experiencing this exodus equally. Congregations that focus on community and encourage a sense of social and civic responsibility seem to fare better with member engagement. Progressive churches that ordain women, affirm LGBTQ members, and engage with contemporary social issues report more stable or even growing female attendance. But these churches remain the minority in American Christianity. Reverend Dr. Amy Butler, former senior minister of Riverside Church in New York City, puts it bluntly: the churches that are losing women are the ones that never really wanted them in the first place. At least not as leaders, thinkers, or full participants. They wanted them as workers, as wombs, as wallets, and women have finally figured that out. The numbers suggest this isn't a temporary blip. Studies consistently show that people who leave religion rarely come back, even if they hold on to some of their formative beliefs. The women walking away aren't taking a break, they're leaving for good. What does this mean for the future of American Christianity? Picture a church in 20 by 40. The congregation is smaller, older, and increasingly male. The children's ministry that once bustled with activity has been reduced to a single classroom. The committees that organized community outreach, hospital visits, and food pantries have dissolved due to lack of volunteers. The building, once maintained by fundraisers organized by the women's ministry, is showing its age. This isn't speculation. It's already happening in churches across America. According to Hartford Seminary, gender-balanced congregations are 3 times as likely to be growing as female-dominated churches. But as churches become increasingly male-dominated, growth becomes even less likely. It's a demographic death spiral. Yet for the women who've left, there's often a sense of peace. Lisa Chung, a 31-year-old physician, describes her journey. "I mourned at first. Church was my whole world growing up. But now I spend Sunday mornings hiking or having breakfast with friends or volunteering at the animal shelter. I'm still the same person with the same values. I just express them differently now." The silence surrounding this exodus is perhaps its most striking feature. Unlike previous religious upheavals marked by protests and manifestos, women are leaving quietly. No Martin Luther nailing theses to the door, no dramatic schisms. Just millions of individual decisions to sleep in on Sunday morning, to delete the church app from their phone, to politely decline when asked to volunteer for vacation Bible school. For many, this has become overwhelming, and church can often seem like the easiest commitment to walk away from, notes one researcher. Women are being asked to excel at work, manage households, raise children, maintain relationships, and then somehow also staff every church committee and teach every Sunday school class. Something had to give. The irony is profound. Christianity, a religion founded by a man who elevated women in a patriarchal society, who had female disciples, who first appeared after resurrection to women. This religion is losing women because many of its institutions can't figure out how to treat them as equals 2,000 years later. Some women find themselves grieving not just for what they've left, but for what could have been. I wanted to raise my daughter in church, says Michelle Roberts, mother of a 5-year-old. I wanted her to have that community, that sense of something bigger, but I couldn't sit there and let her absorb messages that she's somehow less than her brother, that her body is dangerous, that her dreams matter less than finding a husband. So we make our own traditions now. The data suggests this exodus is accelerating, not slowing. As of mid-2025, the gap between male and female attendance is the largest researchers have ever observed, with men at 45% and women at 36%. Each year, the gender gap widens. Each year, more pews sit empty. Yet, perhaps the most telling statistic is this. Despite the exodus, one Gen Z woman wrote, "Young women need the church, too." The tragedy isn't that women no longer need spiritual community. It's that so many churches have failed to provide it in a way that honors their full humanity. As we close, it's worth remembering that behind every statistic is a story. A woman who sang in the choir for 20 years, now spending Sundays at farmers markets. A teenager who dreamed of ministry, now studying philosophy at a secular university. A mother who baptized her children in the same church where she was married, now teaching them ethics and compassion without the framework of organized religion. These women aren't angry rebels trying to destroy Christianity. They're daughters of the church who simply couldn't stay in institutions that seem to value them less with each passing year. Their exodus isn't loud or dramatic. It's happening one empty pew at a time, one declined volunteer request at a time, one quiet Sunday morning at a time. The question isn't whether churches will notice, they already have. The question is whether they'll understand why it happened, and whether they'll change in time to stop the hemorrhaging. Based on current trends, the answer appears to be no. American Christianity is about to discover what happens when you build institutions that depend on women's labor, while denying them equal voice and value. The discovery will reshape the religious landscape for generations to come. This quiet revolution isn't making headlines. There are no protests to cover, no leaders to interview, just millions of women who've decided that their spiritual lives are too important to spend in places that make them feel less than whole. They're not leaving God, many say. They're leaving institutions that claim to speak for God while silencing half of humanity. As one woman put it, "I didn't lose my faith. I just lost my patience." Thanks for watching this deep dive into one of the most significant but underreported shifts in American religious life. What's your take on this exodus? Are you seeing these changes in your own community? Let me know in the comments. And remember, if you value this kind of in-depth analysis that mainstream media often misses, that super thanks button really does help us continue this work. Subscribe and hit the notification bell to catch our next investigation. Until then, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep uncovering the stories that shape our world. This is Professor Archive signing off.